You ready for the word?
Yes, sir.
That's good. Turn to Genesis 13 again. Genesis 13, verse 2. And Abram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. I told you that we were going to look at some key principles that we can find in Abram's life that contributed to him being very rich. The last time we spoke on the subject, which was a couple of weeks ago, we saw that key principle number one was that he chose the correct source. He did not choose man. He did not choose a job. He did not choose a career. He said that Yahweh would make him rich. What an awesome thing that is to believe. To actually believe that Yahweh is going to make you rich. He called Yahweh El Elyon, the Most High, or the Supreme One, the possessor of heaven and earth, the possessor of everything that is. So he said his source for his riches would be Yahweh. Key principle number two was he had great integrity, and we saw that particularly in the way he dealt with the purchase of the field and the cave in which he would entomb Sarah at her death. That transaction takes place in Genesis chapter 13. Abram did not want to use his grief as a means to take advantage of the owner of that field or the owner of that cave. And Ephron, the owner of the field and the cave, did not want to take advantage of Abram's desperate need for a tomb. And so we saw two men of great integrity carry on a business transaction. There's a lot that can be learned from that. But what we glean from these first two principles is that if we want Yahweh to make us rich as he did Abram, then we need to purposely, with our voice, with our prayers, with our thoughts, by our lives, choose Yahweh as our source. And then we need to be people of high integrity in all dealings with others. Today we're going to look at another key principle. We're only going to look at one. There might be a bonus one or two, but we're going to look at one, and it's found in Abraham's life. Key principle number three is this: Abram knew the power of meditating. He knew the power of meditation. Now, I don't know what you think when you hear that word. So allow me to explain what I mean when I use that word. Meditation is the purposeful act of quieting the mind and the heart, quieting the body, and allowing our spirit to help us imagine what should be, could be, what might be. It is the purposeful act of quieting the mind and the body so that we can allow our spirit to help us imagine what could be. If you look the word up, you'll get a variety of definitions. One that I found that I like is this one. It says that meditation is the technique by which we train our attention and our awareness and achieve a mentally clear, emotionally calm, and stable state. So it's training our attention and our awareness to achieve mentally clear, emotionally calm, and a stable state. So think of meditation that way. It is the means by which I train my attention, or train where I'm going to put my attention. Do you want your attention to be on what is all the time? No. Or do you want your attention to be on what could be, what should be? If we spend all of our attention on what is never changes. But if we focus our attention on what we want our lives to be, or what they could be, or what they should be, then that begins to change everything. It changes the way we feel, it changes the way we think, it changes the way we act, it changes our hopes, it changes our dreams, it changes our expectations. So meditation is the way we allow our spirits to help us imagine what could be, and then help us see and understand what we have to do and need to do to bring that into a reality. It's when we get still and quiet that we hear instructions. It's when we get still and quiet that we see opportunities. It's when we get still and quiet that we hear answers. It's when we get still and quiet that we hear the Ruach HaKodesh. He will seldom holler over the noise, if ever. Instead, he whispers in the stillness of quietness. So if we're never still and we're never quiet, then no wonder we have difficulty hearing that quiet voice of the Ruach HaKodesh. Let's look at Abraham. I told you one of the key principles in his life was meditation. I want to show you two examples of this. The first one is in Genesis 15. Now in Genesis 14, Abraham has taken his armed servants and led an attack against the kings who had come in and overthrown the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. And in the process of taking prisoners, they also took Lot as a prisoner. Abraham went after them. He was victorious in defeating those kings, and he returned with the goods and with the people. He gave a tithe of what he brought back to Melchizedek, and then he returned all the goods, and then he returned all the people back to the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. It was in that situation that he made this declaration. He said, I have lifted up my hand to El Elyon, Yahweh, possessor of heaven and earth, that no man shall ever say, I made Abram rich. Immediately following that time of war and that declaration, we read this in Genesis 15:1. Pardon me. After these things, the word of Yahweh came into Abram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Abram, I am your shield and your exceeding great reward. Now, Abram has just declared that that's what Yahweh is. Yahweh is my reward. Yahweh is the one that's going to make me rich. And now Yahweh agrees with what Abraham has said and says to him, I am your shield and your exceeding great reward. But too often what we do is we read this and immediately go straight to what Yahweh said to Abraham instead of paying attention to how he said it. We need to pay attention to how he said it. Listen to how he said it. The word of Yahweh came to Abram in a vision, saying. So it came to him in a vision. The root word for vision in Hebrew is kazah. Kazah means to gaze at. It means mentally to perceive something or to contemplate it with pleasure. To perceive in your mind or to contemplate it on the inside with an emotion attached to it, with pleasure. So before Abraham had a vision, and that word in the Hebrew is makazah, before he had that vision, he had a kazah. And kazah is a vision in which you create yourself. It's a vision where you see something, hear something in your spirit, that you create a conception or a perception that affects you emotionally. It is to gaze at it mentally, perceive it in your thoughts, and contemplate it with pleasure. I suggest to you that Abram's words in Genesis 14 were not empty words when he said, I have lifted up my hand to El Elyon, the Most High, the Supreme One, the possessor of heaven and earth. Those were not just empty words to him. They were his meditations. They were embedded in his soul. When he said them, he felt something. When he said them, he meant it. When he said them, he expected Yahweh to be his rewarder. When he spoke of El Elyon, he used that phrase because he thought of Yahweh in that way, the Supreme High One. He was the possessor of heaven and earth. He had no doubt that Yahweh was able to lift him up, push him forward, make him rich, and he had no doubt that Yahweh was going to do that. In Genesis 14:22, Abram said, I want us to read it. We talked about it, but I want us to read it. Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand to Yahweh, the El Elyon, possessor of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread even to a shoe latchet, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. So do you see what Abram is saying? Do you see Abram fully intends to be rich? Abram fully intends to be rich. And he fully expects those riches to come as a result of the one that he worships. He worships the Supreme One, the El Elyon, Yahweh. He fully expects to be rich, and he fully expects the one that he worships to help him become that way. Abram spent time gazing at this mentally. He perceived that in his heart. He contemplated it with pleasure, because he would take the time to do this, because he would take the time to kazah, contemplate it with pleasure. He could hear the voice of Yahweh in a makazah, in a vision. He meditated on it, which allowed the vision to come to pass, in which he heard the voice of Yahweh say to him, I am your exceeding great reward. Well, I think that no one has ever taught you and I the value or the purpose of meditation. No one has ever taught us the value of mentally perceiving things. No one has ever taught us the value of developing our mental abilities to where we could contemplate something that is not yet as though it was. And allowing that contemplation, allowing that picture in our minds to bring us pleasure. I've never been taught that. How important it is to imagine a thing and to imagine it so strongly that the mere imagination of it brings me pleasure because I begin to see it as a reality. But that act, that technique is actually biblical. And if we practice it, I'm convinced we'll begin to hear the word of Yahweh come to us in visions more frequently. Let me show you this very concept out of the writings of Paul. Go to Ephesians 3. I'm not just plucking a verse out of the Bible, out of Genesis 15 there, and trying to make it more than what it is. This very concept is revealed and expounded upon in Ephesians 3 by Paul. And now unto him who is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, unto him be glory in the assembly by Yeshua HaMashiach throughout all ages, world without end. Amen. Now, unto him, which is Yahweh, Yahweh is able to do exceeding abundantly above. Above what?
We have to think.
Above all that we ask. If we want to see him do something, we have to ask him to do it. You have not because you ask not. He will do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask. So we have to ask. But it also says he'll do exceeding abundantly above all that we ask or think. It's not just our mouth that has to get involved. Our minds, our hearts, our imaginations also have to get involved. To think, if you look this word up in the Greek dictionary, you'll see that it means to observe a thing by using your mind. Or to see something in your mind. It means to exercise the mind to observe. That's meditation. It is taking the mind and exercising it, training it to see something before it is. And Paul said, to him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that I exercise my mind to imagine, To him be glory. Yahweh is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that I exercise my mind to see. If we'll use our minds to see it, if we'll use our minds to contemplate it with pleasure, Yahweh will do it exceeding abundantly above that. The fact is, and this is a fact, we cannot sincerely ask for something until we picture in our minds and in our hearts that we have it. We cannot sincerely ask for it until we've imagined that we can have it. Once we imagine that we can have it, then we have confidence to go to him that can give it. But if we've never imagined that we can have it, we're not going to ask for it. When we can picture having it, in faith we can ask for it, and then Yahweh can do what he does. And here's what Yahweh does. He brings to pass exceeding abundantly above what we've imagined. Let me show you his principle in another place. Same principle, go to Mark 11. Mark 11, look in verse 12. And on the morrow, when they were come from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing a fig tree afar off, having leaves, he came, if perhaps he might find anything thereon. And when he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for the time of figs was not yet. And Yeshua answered and said unto it, he spoke to that tree, no man eat fruit of you hereafter forever. And his disciples heard it. Drop down to verse 20. And in the morning, the next morning, as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter, calling to remember it, said unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which you cursed is withered away. And Yeshua answered, saying unto him, have faith in Yahweh. For verily I say to you, that whosoever shall say to this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he says shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he says. Therefore I say to you, what things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you shall have them. So I ask you, in teaching this process, where does Yeshua say the process begins? Does it begin in what we say? Absolutely not. The process begins in the heart. The heart has to see it as a reality before the mouth speaks it. The heart has to imagine it being so before the words come out. The heart has to observe in a mental picture it taking place, and then the words simply declare what the heart or the mind has already seen. Here's what Yeshua is saying, and you might want to write this down. Yeshua is saying this: if you say something and your heart hasn't already seen it as a reality, the words you speak will not work. If you say something and your heart hasn't already seen what you're saying as a reality, your words are not going to work. We have to spend time meditating, training our minds to see the reality of what we want. Look at verse 24 closely. What things soever you desire, and he said, therefore I say to you, listen to me. He said, listen to me, I'm bringing this to a conclusion. And therefore I say to you, what things soever you desire when you pray, believe that you receive them, and you shall have them. Desire does not take place in our mouth. Desire takes place in the heart. Desire takes place in the mind. To desire something means to crave it. That's the actual definition of this word translated desire. It means to crave it. Cravings don't happen by accident. Cravings happen because we get a mental picture of something. And when we get a mental picture of something, that mental picture creates a craving that causes us to start looking for and longing for the very thing we desire. Advertisers understand this. That's why they show you pictures. They show you pictures of food. They show you pictures of motorcycles, boats, cars. They're trying to fling a craving on you. They're trying to stir up a craving on you. They want us to spend time viewing that image in our hearts. They want that image they're showing us locked inside our brains, inside our minds. Because they know that if we get that picture, we'll start craving it. So the biblical principle is not to wait for somebody else to put picture in your heart and mind. The biblical principle is to train yourself to exercise your own mind, own purpose, to see things and to see them so clearly and imagine them so purposefully that they start causing you to crave the thing you're imagining. That's a biblical principle. And then once we can see ourselves having it, then we ask Yahweh, who is our source, who is El Elyon, who possesses heaven and earth, to give us those things. Yeshua said, if we can say it without doubting it, it comes to pass. He said, if you can say it without doubting it, it comes to pass. He makes it plain and simple. If we say something and our heart hasn't already seen it as a reality, it doesn't come to pass. But if we say it and our heart has already embraced it as a reality, it'll come to pass. So look how much emphasis he's putting on meditation. It's not called that, but that's exactly what it is. Creating an image on the inside of something. He said, if you say something and your heart hasn't already seen it as a reality, it's not going to happen. But if your heart ever sees it as a reality and you say it, it'll come to pass. Meditation then is a biblical principle. Paul agreed, Yeshua agreed, Abraham declared it to be so. Now let's go take another look at an example in Abram's life. Go to Genesis 18, verse 1. And Yahweh appeared unto Abram in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him, and when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself toward the ground. And he said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in your sight, pass not away, I pray you, from your servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts. After that you shall pass on, for therefore are you come to your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. So it starts off by telling us that Yahweh appeared to Abram. What a statement that is. Yahweh has appeared. It's a reality. It really happened. It's not talking about us taking that literally, though there is a literal encounter. What it's saying to us, though, is that Abram had a divine encounter with Yahweh, with a messenger of Yahweh. But I want us to pay attention to when that happened. Before we looked at how it happened, now look at when it happened. What was Abraham doing when it happened? Y'all still tired from Sukkot? What was Abraham doing when it happened?
Sitting in his tent.
Sitting in his tent door. Just sitting. He wasn't inside the tent binging on Netflix. He wasn't inside the tent playing hours and hours of video games. He made time to just sit in the door of the tent. Just sit. What was he doing?
Meditating.
That's right. He was thinking. He was being still. Remember, Ruach HaKodesh doesn't holler over the noise. He whispers in stillness and quietness. He's just being still. He's listening. He's looking. He's wondering. He's imagining. He could have found something to do to keep himself busy. You know, he had plenty to keep him busy. Genesis 13 told us he had lots of cattle. You ever had lots of cattle? Cattle keep you busy. He had men servants and maid servants. Employees can keep a man very busy. He was very rich in gold and silver. That could occupy a man's thoughts very easily. But even though he could have easily found something to keep his body and mind busy, instead he got still and quiet and just sat in the tent door, and the result was an encounter. He saw something that he wouldn't have seen if he had been busy doing stuff. That's another good point to write down. He saw something he'd have never seen if he'd have been busy doing stuff. Just as surely as it is necessary for us to use our hands and work diligently, it is also necessary at times to make time to fold our hands and just sit quietly. It's when we do this that we see things and hear things that we would never see and we would never hear if we were busy. Look at verse 2. It tells us that Abraham had to lift up his eyes and look. See that? That's telling us that he did not sit in the tent, that he was not sitting in the tent door looking out over everything he owned, paying attention to it, making sure the cattle was all right, making sure his men servants doing what they're supposed to, the maid servants doing what they're supposed to. He wasn't sitting in the tent observing everything he owned. He was either sitting there, according to verse 2, with his eyes closed or his head down. Because he had to look up, lift up his eyes and look to see. So he's sitting there with his eyes closed, meditating, his head down, thinking, and he lifts up his eyes to see what he saw. Now what follows are some bonus key principles that did make him rich, so I'll share those with you. Bonus principle number 1 is, when he saw what he saw, he quickly responded.
Yeah.
He didn't sit there and ponder it for a day or two. Sometimes an opportunity only lasts about that long. And when you see it, you got to move. He saw the opportunity and he quickly responded. Hesitancy and overthinking a thing is not our friend. Some blessings require that we act swiftly in order to secure them. If we overthink them, we'll lose them. Don't doubt what you see and don't doubt what you hear in your quiet time. You see something or hear something, move on what you see or hear. If you see or hear something, write it down and immediately figure out or seek an answer on what you're supposed to do concerning what you saw or hear. Write it down and move. The second bonus key principle is here, he not only responded quickly, it says that when he saw what he saw, he ran to it. Well, isn't that the same thing? No. He didn't just respond quickly. He didn't just go immediately. He went there running. Now let me show you how significant that is. Look down in verse 11. Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age. He's not just old, age has struck him. Yet, he was still able to run. Look in verse 7. And Abram ran into the herd and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man. And he, Abram, or he, the servant, hasted to dress it. Abram ran into the herd and fetched the calf. So he runs to them and he runs to the herd. Point is, Abram had taken care of himself physically. Just because you get old doesn't mean you have to become decrepit.
Right.
And this wasn't just automatic. Well, of course he was physically okay. He had to walk everywhere he went. Well, there's a lot of people that lived in that day that weren't physically okay. He took care of himself on purpose. You know, Abraham had enough wealth that he could have chosen to sit in his tent and eat and drink himself into oblivion if he wanted to, and have everybody else do things for him, and he'd just sit there and enjoy the fruits of his labor until his body no longer worked. But instead, on purpose, he took care of his physical health. You know how old he was that day, sitting in that tent? He was 99 years old. 99 years old. And he ran. So that's just two bonus key principles I'll throw in there. He knew not to hesitate when Yahweh showed him something, and he knew to take care of his physical health. We got to be physically healthy if we're going to generate wealth. Back to the point of meditation though. He was able to see the one who would speak into existence the birth of Isaac, because he dared to sit quietly in his tent door. He saw three men. Hebrews, taking this situation into account, says that sometimes you entertain angels unaware. He did not know these were messengers of Yahweh. He thought they were men. But he ran to them and he invited them to come and allow him the honor of supplying them with refreshments, with a meal, with a time of rest. Little did he know that he, Yahweh, through one, would speak into existence the birth of Isaac. Sometimes when we respond to an opportunity, we can't see the full effect of it. But we need to see opportunities, respond to them, and see what they do produce. Right. Abram was a man of honor and integrity who did many great, wonderful, even heroic things. He was a warrior when he needed to be. He was a negotiator of integrity. He was a hard worker. The scriptures show us this over and over again. He just demonstrated that he was a doer. And as a doer, he did great things. However, the Bible reveals to us that Yahweh was only able to do great things for Abraham because there were times that Abraham would sit quietly and meditate.
Amen.
Abraham did great things. We see Yahweh doing great things for him when he made time to get quiet, when he made time to get still. It's a key principle that you and I need to take seriously. We must see the value of being still. We have to see the value of being quiet. We have to see the value of training our brains to perceive, training our brains to see things that we desire. We have to see the value of imagining them so strongly that the image that we create of them begins to bring us the same emotions as if physically we had that thing. In our minds and hearts, we can see it so strongly we have the exact same emotion attached to it as if it was ours. We have to see the value of meditating on who it is we worship. See, we call him Yahweh. That's awesome. That's his name. But have we imagined who Yahweh is to the point that when we refer to him, we can't help but refer to him as El Elyon? Well, don't you know who I worship? He's the Most High. He's the Supreme One. He's the possessor of heaven and earth. He's not just Yahweh. He is Yahweh, the Supreme One. That kind of declaration can only come from meditation. We have to see the value of considering in our hearts that he wants to make us rich. Abraham was convinced that that was so. He was convinced that Yahweh wanted to make him rich. And if Abram is our father, and if we are the seed of Abram, why would we not also be convinced of the same thing? At the Red Sea, Moses stilled the people and said, "Be still and see." Those are good words for us. We need to learn how to make a practice out of getting still and purposefully seeing things in our mind and heart. I'm going to close by looking at one more passage. It's found in Joshua chapter 6. Another perfect example of Yahweh showing to us that he wants us to have images in our mind, perceptions in our heart. There'll be two passages that tie it together, but our focus is going to be on Joshua 6 for now. Joshua 6 verse 1. Now Jericho was straitly shut up because of the children of Israel. None went out, none came in. And Yahweh said unto Joshua, what did Yahweh say to him?
See.
See. Yahweh said to Joshua, see, I have given into your hand Jericho. Not I will. He didn't say see that I will. He said see that I have. Days and days before it ever took place, Yahweh said, see, I have given into your hand Jericho and the king thereof and the mighty men of valor. They don't have the city yet. It is not yet theirs. There's a lot that has to happen before it can be theirs. But Yahweh knows that in order for him to make it theirs, Joshua has to see it before it happens. So he says, see, I have given into your hand Jericho. See it as if it's done. See it as a reality. See it completed before we start. He didn't say I will. He said I have. If you want to do a wonderful word study, take this Hebrew word translated see and find all the different ways it gets translated. You'll find it gets translated as advise self. So what Yahweh said to Joshua was, advise yourself, I've given you the city. Advise yourself, I gave you Jericho. I have given you Jericho. In other words, advise yourself, Joshua, it's done. Because Joshua may be thinking, well, Yahweh's going to do it. Yahweh's saying to Joshua, no, I need you to advise yourself, it is done. Another way it gets translated is approve. So approve in your heart and mind that it's done. Another way is it's translated is the word gaze. So we could say it this way. Yahweh said to Joshua, in your heart and mind, gaze upon the finished work. Gaze upon it as if it's done already. Another word is translated, or another way it's translated is See joyfully. See joyfully, I have given you Jericho. Because see, if you can truly see it, it's going to affect your emotions. If your emotions do not get involved, you do not yet see it. You're trying to convince yourself. But once you become convinced, emotions get attached to it. Keep thinking on it, imagining it, until it starts to affect you emotionally as if you already possess what you're imagining. Another way it's translated is the word stare. So Yahweh said to Joshua, stare at this until it's solidified in your soul. I have given you Jericho. One more way is visions. It gets translated as visions. So Yahweh is telling Joshua, envision this in your heart. Don't wait to have a vision from me. Create a vision of your own in your heart, in your mind, that I've given you Jericho. So meditation is not a practice created by occultists or spiritualists or by a New Age movement. Meditation is a biblical principle. And our ignorance of it perhaps has played a role in our not being as rich as Yahweh would like for us to be. Or at least not as rich as Yahweh is capable of making us. So today what we can do, we can brush it aside and treat this as just another teaching that we can forget and move on to next Sabbath and wait on another teaching. That process by Yeshua is called one that makes the heart fat. Or we can write it down, research it, think on it, meditate on it, and begin to practice meditation. And I'm certain that at first we'll be clumsy at it. I'm certain that at first it'll be difficult and we'll struggle with it. I'm certain that at first we may have difficulty quieting our heart, making our mind be still, so that our spirit can cause us to imagine and to see possibilities and opportunities that Yahweh wants for us. I'm sure that at first we'll have a hard time shutting down all the noise. But I also know that if we'll start, we won't ignore this, but if we'll actually start, we'll get better at it.
Yeah.
And then if we get better at it, then we will, with uplifted hands, say what Paul said in Ephesians chapter 3, and you might want to turn there. So Paul said, now unto him that is able, Ephesians 3:20, now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that I ask or think, according to the power that works in me, unto him be glory in the assembly by Yeshua the Messiah throughout all ages, world without end. Amen. Now unto him that is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all I ask or think. Now, listen to the last part. The reason I want you to turn there again, I want you to listen to the last part of that. He said, now unto him that is able to do exceeding abundantly above all that I ask or think, according to, and according to is very important. He said, this is how it'll come to pass. It'll be by Yeshua HaMashiach. It'll be by him. But Yahweh will be able to do exceeding abundantly above all I ask or think according to this. According to what?
Power that works in us.
The power that works in me. There's a power at work in us. And it's only through meditation that we're able to connect to that power. Now, what kind of power is it? We have to read the book of Ephesians to know what he's talking about. But if you'll go read the first chapter of Ephesians, he will make it plain that the very power that Yahweh used to raise Yeshua from the dead, and he said that was the greatest display of Yahweh's power ever. There was great displays of his power in creation, and there's been great displays of his power throughout the ages, but he said the greatest display of Yahweh's power is the power he used to raise Yeshua from the dead. And he said that very power that he used to raise Yeshua from the dead is at work in us. Resurrection power is in us. So we ought to be living a resurrected life. If this power raised Yeshua from the dead, it can raise us out of a week-to-week living process.
Yeah.
It can raise us out of a paycheck-to-paycheck type of life. It can raise us out of barely getting by. It can raise us out of poverty. The power that was used to raise Yeshua from the dead working in us can raise us above lack and want and debt and distress and sickness and disease. That's what Paul's wanting us to get a hold of, is that power's working in us. But sometimes we get so busy with life and let life get so busy around us that we're never even aware of that power. But we become aware of that power by thinking, meditating, getting still, getting quiet. And then in that meditation, imagining and seeing things, connecting with them, and that releases the power by which Yahweh is able to do for us exceeding abundantly above what we're asking or thinking. So understand this, that when we talk about this, we're not talking simply about us becoming prosperous. If you listen to what Paul said there in Ephesians 3, what this is about watching Yahweh work in our lives and then being able to say to others, glory to Him who by Yeshua did for me what got done. Glory to Him throughout all ages, world without end. He's the one that lifted me up. He's the one that did exceeding abundantly above all that I asked or thought. I connected with El Elyon, and El Elyon lifted me from the place I was. No man did it, no job did it, no career did it, my smarts didn't do it. I connected with El Elyon, and He lifted me up. Imagine it to be so. Connect our emotions to it. Don't doubt it in our heart. Ask for it, speak of it, and then have what you say.
Amen.
It's that simple. Don't forget this. Don't brush it off and just wait for next Sabbath's lesson. Begin to practice it. And if you forget a few days, then just go back. Set aside a time to do some meditating, thinking, imagining. Get still, get quiet, and see what happens. In line with that, let me share this with you before I dismiss you. This year, it was awesome, but this year we were able to set aside $4,000 for a building as a result of one of the Moedim offerings. That's awesome. We need a building, and $4,000 is a good start. 2 weeks ago, I received a note and another $5,000.
Wow.
Yeah, wow's right, isn't it? Another $5,000 toward that building. And the note said that we should begin to get a drawing of what we want. And that struck me when I read it, but it struck me even more as I prepared for today's service. Because part of the instruction was to make sure that we don't think too small. And the words were, if you build it, they'll come. Well, that ties in perfectly with today's Torah lesson. It's time to put a building on paper that we can imagine coming to pass.
Amen. Yes.
A building that goes beyond what we think we can afford. but a building that will bring honor and glory to Torah, to Yahweh, to Yeshua, to the Ruach HaKodesh. We need to put a building on paper and then connect our imaginations and our meditations to it and watch Yahweh do exceeding abundantly above all that we can ask or think.
Yes.
You agree?
Yes.
The word of Yahweh is alive and powerful. May we never be the same after we listen to His word. Yahweh bless you and keep you. Yahweh make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yahweh lift up His countenance upon you